Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Tiverton for securing this very important debate. It has been very welcome to see. There has been a fair bit of consensus in this House today. I fear that I may make a few comments which may not secure consensus across the House, but I will speak freely. I think it's an important debate because, unfortunately, the BBC's plans to cut local news coverage, in my view, is another sign of the BBC badly missing the mark and demonstrating how out of touch its national leadership has become with the majority of its audience. Public confidence in the BBC, I would argue, is currently hanging by a thread, not least after increasing instances of political bias in its national news coverage. At the height of COVID-19 outbreak, for example, 5 doctors and nurses were interviewed as part of the Panorama programme, looking at the supply of PPE, and were critical of the government's response. But it emerged later, however, that all of them were long-standing Labour Party activists or supporters. The BBC either failed to realise this, or worse, went ahead with such a one-sided piece anyway. Public confidence in the BBC has also been knocked recently, and I'm not just saying this because it's my favourite comedy, but by high-minded executives to remove programmes such as Little Britain from its iPlayer platform, recently over theories that some characters could be construed as offensive. This censorious decision, taken on viewers' behalf, implies that those of us who continue to enjoy comedies such as Little Britain have something fundamentally wrong with us, and that we can't be trusted to watch a comedy programme from just over a decade ago without taking away the wrong messages, which fall below today's standards of political correctness. It's actually quite chilling that a state broadcaster, funded by taxpayers and licence fee payers, is taking decisions to erase parts of our past with no consultation or democratic process. The national leadership of the BBC therefore needs to be careful what it wishes for when it looks at cutting local news coverage to make just £125 million of savings. Unlike BBC's often contentious national, I'm going to say some things some other members of the side of the House might actually agree with now, so I'm just going on to it. I've got some slightly more sort of fluffy and positive things to say. Unlike the BBC's often contentious national news coverage, which is out of touch on many decisions, so BBC's local news and politics coverage is one of the few BBC outputs which still unites many of us in support of the corporation. The BBC local news coverage, like the excellent BBC Radio Suffolk and BBC Look East, we have household names such as Andrew Sinclair and Mark Murphy, his morning show on the BBC Radio Suffolk, and I mention BBC Radio Suffolk because I fear that this decision on the regional politics TV coverage will have implications also in time for our brilliant local BBC stations. It's one of the few things and I do remember, and I do think this message that needs to be sent to the BBC is that there are many members of this House who are very much undecided when it comes to the future of the BBC and whether or not the licence fee should be looked at. The Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North is slightly more robust in his view. He's obviously come to his decision already. But there are members such as myself and my right honourable friend, Member for Forest of Dean. And we are undecided at the moment. And I remember sitting down with the head of the radio content for Norfolk and Suffolk, and he asked me my position on the matter. And I said, and I at the time thought you could treat the national BBC separately from the local BBC. But of course he explained to me that we couldn't. Because I was of a mind I had all sorts of issues of national BBC coverage, some of the examples I've just outlined. But for me, BBC Radio Suffolk, BBC Look East, these are incredibly important to our local democracy and holding politicians to account. And the fact that you can't separate them out at that time was the reason that I then said to him that on balance right now, I support the licence fee, just about on balance. But of course, we've now had the last few months where more concerns have been raised about BBC impartiality and some of the coverage that we've seen. And of course, we're now having this debate right here about the future of BBC regional political shows, which could easily morph into the future of local radio stations. So my message to the BBC would be think very carefully about the decisions that you make over the coming months, because it could just have an implication for a corporation's future. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.